She was 8 years old, and she was eating out of a dumpster. Pause 2 secs, not scraps that someone had kindly set aside. Not a mistake. She was digging through the rotting produce bin behind a restaurant called Aurelia on the coldest night of the year, because her stomach had stopped asking politely 3 days ago and started screaming instead. Her hair hung in matted ropes around, a face streaked with dirt and something that might have been dried blood from a fall she didn't remember. Her overalls, 3 sizes too big, had been someone else's before they were hers. She didn't know whose. She didn't know much of anything anymore except that the metal lid of the dumpster was heavy and her arms were shaking. And there was a half a baguette in there if she could just reach it. She didn't hear the back door open. Emotional music swells. Chef Julian Marchetti had built Aurelia over 11 years. One Michelin star at a time, out of a stubbornness that his ex-wife used to call beautiful and exhausting in equal measure. He was 52 years old. Silver-haired, precise in a way that terrified his line cooks and comforted his regulars. He stepped out to check the delivery schedule taped to the door. And instead he found a child elbow-deep in his garbage, frozen mid-motion like a rabbit caught in headlights. One hand still wrapped around a piece of bread that had been thrown away 4 hours earlier. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He should have called the police. That was the rational thing, the responsible thing, the thing that would have covered him legally and gotten her help through the proper channels. He thought about it. He genuinely thought about it, standing there in his chef's whites with his breath fogging in the cold. Instead he said, "That bread is stale. I have better." She bolted 3 steps before her legs simply gave out from exhaustion, and she stood there trembling, ready to run the moment her body remembered how. "I'm not going to touch you," he said quietly. "I'm going to go back inside, and I'm going to bring out a plate. You can take it and go, or you can eat it here where it's warm. Either way is fine." He went inside. He didn't look back to see if she'd run. Some part of him assumed she would. She didn't. Pause 2 secs. When he came back out with a plate of risotto still steaming from the pass, she was still there, pressed against the brick wall like she was trying to disappear into it. He set the plate down on an overturned crate, several feet away from her, and stepped back. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where her parents were. He'd learned somehow without ever being taught that a starving child doesn't need questions. She needs a chair or a crate and something warm, and a few feet of distance so she can decide for herself that it's safe. She ate like she was afraid the plate would be taken from her. He watched from just inside the doorway and said nothing. And something in his chest cracked open in a way he hadn't felt since his divorce. Since his own daughter had stopped calling. Since he'd started measuring his life in covers per night instead of anything that actually mattered. That night, he didn't call anyone. He gave her a jacket from the lost and found bin, showed her the alcove behind the walk-in freezer where the exhaust vent kept a small patch of concrete warm, and told her, without making a production of it, that she could sleep there if she needed to. She came back the next night. And the next. Pause 2 secs. By the 3rd week she had a name. Mira, she finally told him, though he suspected it wasn't the one she was born with, and a job of sorts. She washed herbs. She learned to tell parsley from cilantro, then learned to tell good basil from bruised basil, then learned, faster than any call me he'd trained in a decade, how to taste a sauce and say what it was missing. He never asked about her family. She never offered. There are some silences that are kindness, and he understood that instinctively. However, neither of them had any idea that this small, quiet act of feeding a hungry child would come back to save him. Not metaphorically, but literally 16 years later. Pause 2 secs. Myra stayed at Aurelia for 4 years, sleeping in a small room above the restaurant that Julian insisted on calling storage on the lease so social services would never ask questions he couldn't answer. He enrolled her in school under a guardianship arrangement that cost him more in lawyers' fees than he'd ever admit. He taught her everything, not just knife skills and reduction sauces, but the discipline underneath them, the idea that precision was a form of respect. That a kitchen run with care was a kitchen that could hold anything, even a girl who'd been thrown away once already. At 16. She left for culinary school on a scholarship he had quietly arranged and never told her about. At 22, she was working the line at a 2-star restaurant in Lyon. At 26, she opened her own place, Small, 12 tables. No sign out front except a hand-painted A in gold leaf. And homage nobody but she and Julian understood. She called him every Sunday. Not out of obligation. Out of habit, the good kind, the kind that survives distance and years and everything else that tends to erode people's promises. Pause 2 secs. It was on a Sunday call, 11 years after she'd left, that she heard something in his voice she'd never heard before. Not sadness exactly, depletion. I'm fine, he told her. The way people say it, when they are the furthest thing from it. She flew back the next morning. What she found was a man who had lost 30 pounds. A restaurant that had quietly stopped taking dinner reservations 3 nights a week because the chef couldn't stand for 6 hours straight anymore. A diagnosis he'd been sitting on for 4 months. A treatment plan he'd looked at once and folded back into its envelope because the numbers on the estimate made the actual illness feel like the smaller problem. Stage 2 pancreatic cancer. Treatable, the doctor said, if aggressive, if funded. If he stopped being so impossibly stubborn about accepting help. I didn't want you to worry, he said. Sitting at his own kitchen table, in his own restaurant, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. You have your own life, your own restaurant. Myra did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him the way he used to look at a dish that wasn't finished yet, evaluating unhurried, already 3 steps ahead. You gave me a plate of risotto when you didn't have to, she said. You gave me a room. A name people actually used. 11 years of Sundays. You do not get to tell me what I'm allowed to worry about. Pause 2 secs. She sold her share of her own restaurant to her business partner within the month. She moved back into the same small room above. Aurelia, the one still labeled storage on paperwork nobody had ever bothered to correct. She ran his kitchen during the day and sat with him through chemotherapy in the afternoons. And when the medical bills outpaced even what her restaurant sale had covered, she did something Julian never expected and never would have allowed. If she'd asked him first, she didn't ask him first. She told his story carefully, gently, without turning his dignity into a spectacle, to the community that had eaten at his tables for 2 decades. Former line cooks he'd trained now running kitchens across the country. Regulars who'd celebrated anniversaries and closed business deals at his corner table for 15 years. A quiet fundraiser, no cameras, no headlines, just an old chef's people finally getting the chance to feed him back. It covered everything. The treatment, the recovery. 18 months of a private nurse he protested and secretly adored. Pause 2 secs, he's in remission now. He still comes down to the kitchen most mornings, slower than he used to. Leaning on the past a little more than he'd like to admit, calling out corrections in the same low, precise voice that once terrified an entire generation of line cooks. Mayra runs the pass beside him. Above the door to the walk-in freezer, where a small patch of concrete used to stay warm from the exhaust vent, there's a small brass plaque now. It doesn't say much, just a date. And 4 words, this is where it started. Nobody who eats at Aurelia today knows that the restaurant's most celebrated chef once ate stolen bread behind its own dumpster. They don't need to know. Some stories aren't meant for everyone. They're meant for the 2 people who live them. And for whoever needs on a cold night of their own to believe that a single plate of risotto, offered without a single question asked, can echo for 16 years and come back around to save the very hands that gave it. Emotional music swells. Pause 2 secs. If you believe that the kindness we give away quietly is never really gone, that it waits and grows and finds its way back to us when we need it most, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share it with someone who needs to believe that too.